Before serving in the Assembly, Brendan was an educator, nonprofit executive director, so he knows some of our pains, and environmental activist. It is so wonderful to have you here. We showed some of our people during lunch, your video that you did for Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month. And I assured people that one of the most amazing things that we have here in our, is that our speaker of the Assembly in our leadership position is an arts champion. So welcome, Speaker Brendan, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Julie. Good to see you. Good to see everyone. I appreciated you giving my bio. The only thing that you left out was my first job out of college in 1992 to 1994 was in the arts. I worked at the Museum of Contemporary Art in downtown Los Angeles. It was a while ago, several MoCA administrations ago, in the time of Richard Kashalik and Paul Schimmel. A great time to be at MoCA. Later went on to write my doctoral dissertation on aesthetic theory, the Situationists, a lot of sort of 1958 onward aesthetic theorists that were really inspiring to me. And still the arts very much inform the way I see the world and the way I think about the world. So when I get these invitations, I get very excited. To sort of touch folks who are so inspiring to me. And I'm really excited to talk to all of you today, particularly about how to advocate successfully for the arts, because again, that's really the sort of marrying of the two worlds that I care most about and that I've worked in. I really like to think of advocacy as the art of politics. And I think it's sort of starting to sort of talk about this. I think for starters, as you all know, everything is art and everything is politics. So the arts are already political. The best art, I think, is often on the ragged sort of cutting edge, and involves a critical look at what is happening in our society. It's very, very obvious to look around and see the political role of the arts in a lot of the countless photo images, murals, and posters of George Floyd that helped keep his memory alive through the trial of his convicted killer just last week. The movement that washed over the country demanding justice manifested itself in those artworks. There is no question in my mind that those works strengthened that movement for sure. The murals that we see of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ruth Bader Ginsburg are not only political, but they're also manifestations of our political culture. It is just as important that we support those grassroots efforts as it is to support museums and symphonies. And that's why I started the Southeast Los Angeles Arts Festival for Southeast Los Angeles, which generally happens every July. The last couple of years, because of COVID, have sort of moved it online. But in my district, I wanted to make sure that I supported the cultural work that was already going on in the district, even if the creators aren't as well known as they are in other parts of the state and other parts of the world. For me, the festival is important for showing that everyday culture produced in these communities is important. For me, the next step is a cultural arts center that we're working to develop along the Los Angeles River. And there have been renderings of it in the LA Times and the New York Times in recent months. We have support from a lot of LA area institutions for the Cultural Arts Center, and you'd recognize the names of all those institutions. And we have the vision of an architect whose work is celebrated throughout the world. The point is, though, that the local culture and as well as world culture have value, and they have to support each other. And I think for me, it's important for you to think about that when you advocate for the arts. I think I'm sitting in the Capitol here in Sacramento. Often when we're advocating for anything, whether it's early childhood education or in any types of programs that we're advocating for, we often try to impress or sort of, we try to astound people with numbers by saying, X number of children benefit from the programs. But, ultimately, I think the small programs are no less important than the big ones because they're all connected. But it's also important to remember on a very granular level, the things that happen in people's districts. And when I say a granular level, I mean down to individuals. The best thing you can possibly do when advocating for the arts is to give the name of a child in someone's district, give the name of an individual in someone's district, give the name of a gang member who's benefited from an arts program, as a lot of folks have in my district from a couple of mural programs that we've helped to fund. And to talk about the impact of those that the arts have had on those individual people. Gustavo Dudamel, the LA Philharmonic, who we brought to the site of our arts festival and has been involved in the planning for our cultural arts center, recently obviously signed on to be the music director of the Paris Opera as well. He came out of a program to teach music to disadvantaged kids. That's something that influenced his life, and now he's turned around and with Yola is sort of returning that favor. That's a great story, and great stories are really the cornerstone for advocacy. Again, budget numbers are important, and it's good to be able to tell a decision maker how many people throughout the state are benefiting from certain programs. But ultimately, your focus should be on their community on the most granular level imaginable. The big thing in doing that is to know stories that will stick in their minds. Again, if you can tell a decision maker about a child who you can name from their community, that makes a good story. Tell them about how that kid bloomed when they got to take music lessons or when they were able to see live theater and talk about it with their parents. Last week, I did a great online talk. I have an art talk every other week. Every other Thursday, I'm doing an ad for myself. It's every other Thursday, I believe at 5:30, I do an art talk. I had an art talk last Thursday with a great scientist and artist by the name of Maru Garcia. Check her out on the internet. She's an amazing artist from Mexico who now lives in Southern California. And she combines her art with science and addresses what's actually going on in our community. I think it was really important for the people in my district to see her demonstrate that even the dirt in their neighborhood could be a source of art and could be a source of stories. And of course, it's also a source of politics too. Some of Maru's work is a critique of the lead contamination of the communities in my district caused by industry. So, in summary, always remember that art and politics go hand in hand. You know that. Art is always political. But advocacy is stronger when you make it local for the decision maker. This is a huge state, vast geographies. My district is 400 miles away from the chair that I'm sitting in right now. If you can talk about what's happening in my district way back home, that resonates for me. And the best way to do it is to tell stories. And that's what artists do. So you ought to be able to do that. So I hope that helps. And thank you very much.
Speaker, that's tremendous advice. I do this for a living, and yet I just took a full page of notes. So I hope everybody else who is listening did as well. And I think two things that really stuck for me, which is stories to stick in their minds so that you can utilize the stories and tell us those, you then recount those later. And then I think that we had a youth empowerment panel earlier today, and what you were talking about youth who, not only are they maybe prevented from going down paths that are not going to create healthy lives, but also career development. that there is, that arts is work, and that there is work in the arts, and that these can be pathways to careers and successful careers. And so I think that that's something we also have to remind ourselves, because I think sometimes some policymakers, not the ones as educated as you are about the arts, might think of the arts as sort of like a nice to have, but it's not labor. And I think one of the things that we're finding that we're really shifting in terms of our own narrative is understanding that artists are workers, and that that is labor, and that is valuable labor. So
thank you. You're right.
Well,
so right.
We thank you so much for your time, and always for your words of wisdom. And Mary, please send me the link to his art talk. I'm tuning in.
Come on in.
Can't wait to tune in. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks
and
so
we'll see you again soon.
Cheers.
Thank you. Okay, take care. All right, so if that doesn't get you feeling like all warm and fuzzy about the leadership at the in Sacramento, at the head of the assembly does an art talk every other week, that's just so exciting. And I think he gave some really excellent points, which now I'm going to fade away here and hand it off to Ron Muriera, the Vice President of California for the Arts Board, and he and Keisha Dumas-Heath, who is also on our board, are going to lead you guys through some workshop exercises to develop your own advocacy plan and join us in this fantastic movement. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. And thank you everyone for joining us. Those were very inspirational words that the speaker shared with us. I was writing furiously notes as well, but I think the one thing that he shared with us is great stories are the cornerstone of advocacy. And that's something that we will continue to reiterate and make sure that is a key core for us as we move forward. So in our short time together this afternoon, we're gonna get all this done. So this afternoon's agenda, we'll talk about what does effective advocacy look like, and what the difference is between advocacy and lobbying. And many folks on this Zoom workshop probably are aware, but we're going to refresh your memory with regards to that. What are some of the steps to effective advocacy, and how do you build and cultivate relationships? The speaker talked about how important it is to develop relationships, not just with our legislators at the state capitol, but also regionally and locally. And that's your city council members, your county supervisors, even your school board. Communication is essential, and we'll talk about that. And then we're going to have you break out and do some quick brainstorm activity, because it is a workshop after all. And then we're going to talk about how, or show examples how art is a political tool. As the speaker had said, art and politics go hand in hand. And then, you know, we hope that you'll be also using the chat feature to put in questions that we will respond to as often as we can. And then we'll share some resources with you with regards to continuing to develop your advocacy toolkit and your base knowledge for being an effective arts advocate. So let's move on. So I just want to share with folks, you know, what does effective advocacy look like? And there's some key characteristics when we look at effective advocacy. And one of them is understanding, again, the difference between advocacy and lobbying, and we'll talk more about that. Being able to follow through with your advocacy plan. And this means that you have to pivot or transition based on either policy or legislative updates. So it means being flexible with an advocacy plan. Cultivate relationships with your legislators, but more importantly, I feel legislative staff, because they are the key folks who provide analysis to the legislators and to the elected officials, and to policymakers as well. So it doesn't also just reside with advocacy with elected officials, but they're key decision makers in other forms, agencies within our governmental structures and our framework. And it's always important to communicate with your elected officials, your audience that you're going to target in terms of your advocacy efforts, and the public and the media. So with laying that groundwork, we want to show you and illustrate basically what effective advocacy looks like. And right now I want to introduce my colleague, Keisha Dumas-Heath. She's executive director of the nonprofit Museum of African American Art in Los Angeles. And she manages, operates, and is a communication, member engagement, visitor experience, community outreach, and program development person. She has shared with me, a one-person shop, right? That one-person team. So she does everything. She has all the hats and does it extremely well. She curated the museum's first ever online exhibition as part of the Google Arts and Culture platform. And prior to her role as executive director, she was a longtime member of the museum's board of directors. She served for 6 years on the board of directors for the California Association of Museums, and she holds a bachelor's degree in English and master's degree in African American literature from Howard University, and an alumna of the Getty Multicultural Museum Internship Program. What's great is she has and brings a deep understanding of how arts organizations impact their communities, in addition to advocating for museums and the arts. And Keisha is not just, all this and a bag of chips. She's an editor, a writer, a poet, a mother of 2 sons whose beautiful Black lives matter. So what we want to do is we want to show you Keisha's testimonial poem to at the informational hearing at the Assembly with regards to restarting the arts. So let's key that up, and we'll have Keisha talk about this afterwards.
Next, we're going to go to Keisha Dumas, Keisha Dumas Heath, who is the director of the Museum of African American Art. And again, Keisha, if you can just give us a few examples. We know that about 3/4 of your presentations have to be cut because of time, but we want to hear just your plea.
Good morning.
Keisha?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I apologize, we're having there she is.
Good morning.
Hi, Keisha.
Thank you. Thank you to the Assembly Committee and to the Chair, Assemblymember Clark Silver, for your efforts to listen to all voices at today's informational hearing on restarting the arts. As I submit this formal testimony, I hope the committee will forgive the time, because you're inspired by the arts and we all listen more closely when words rhyme. To Assemblymember Kamlager, who has been listening from the start, greetings from the 54th District and the Museum of African American Art. Our members are dying, many from COVID-19, others from good old age, still more from isolation, unemployment, and rage. We've shown our longevity, and now there's a necessity for our museum to seek funding in ways we might not have before, so that we won't be ignored. All the arts are equally essential, and budget size is not a credential. We want to be eligible, even if our budget seems negligible. In grant-making circles, there seems to be some fear that if your organization is small, you might disappear. Let us counter that notion. We are still here. The Museum of African American Art is in its 45th year. We received a small CARES recovery grant, and we will continue to apply for all funding opportunities for which we qualify. Our revenues since the shutdown have decreased by 68% for rentals, gift shop sales, and memberships, which all relied on in-person events. When we host events, we offer food. Some people come for the turkey wraps or send their kids into the museum for a much-needed snack, because we don't turn our backs. Anyone can visit for free, and no one will ask for their ticket or their sticker or for their pass. No one will turn them away or ask them to leave. We say, thank you for coming. Enjoy the art, please. When the event is ending, we ask, why don't you wait just a few more minutes and take home a plate? Now we're planning virtual events and launching new communications, seeking funding not for projects, but for reopening and operations. We've been shuttered, and the guidelines for reopening have seemed cluttered. We are inside a retail space that is open. People don't understand why we're closed. Does one guideline fit all museums? That's one of the questions we pose. When it's all done and spoken, we would like to reopen, even for limited activities. We can be part of the remedy. We are an art museum inside a retail place, compelled to redefine how we use our space. Our large event hall is one of our few surpluses, and we could reopen for public health purposes. Metro, Center Theater Group, and the commissioners of the Los Angeles Police have all come to our museum for community outreach. We're ready to activate that same outreach machine to help the museum's neighbors get that vaccine. We don't have an endowment. What we have is empowerment from a community that trusts us to educate creatively, from health to social justice. We are an important part of an arts ecosystem that is not yet an equal system. It still discriminates on the basis of size. We ask you to revise your understanding of what it means to be an anchor institution. Museums of all sizes can be part of the solution. Even on the smallest budget, we will leave you with our 2 cents. The arts are feeding your constituents. Thank you for your time. California has been called the state of the arts, and we encourage you to legislate accordingly. Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome. That was incredible. Thank you. And I think you summed up. And again, it goes back, if the governor's team is watching and listening, it goes back to guidelines, guidelines, guidelines. I noted the space that you were talking about, that you are in a retail space, and you're also looking to do things related to vaccines, and I think it's very compelling. Thank you. We will, if you would not mind allowing us to have that script, or if you want to say poem, very brilliantly written, we will make sure that we get that to Dr. Magali and to our governor's team. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much for viewing that. I want to, before we go to Keisha, I wanted to give a little moment to Julie so she can actually set the background of where that occurred. Julie.
Yeah, I just wanted to set the scene so that everyone understands just how incredibly impactful that was. So we helped to organize an assembly committee hearing, which Sharon Quirk-Silva, who is the woman who was speaking, who's the chair of this committee, was holding on restarting the arts, because this was back in, when was this? I can't even think of it, life's a blur.
February, it was February.
February, and so we needed to get guidelines. As many of you know, we had no guidelines to restarting and to reopening the arts. And so we needed that. And so we worked together. We had 18 speakers at this hearing. I was one of them. I had written this long thing. She interrupted me in the middle of what I was saying and said, okay, that's really nice, but let's keep moving, blah, 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 blah. So when we got to Keisha's testimony, it was one of those things where it was like, and Keisha had said to me, can I read it to you prior? And she told me this, and I started to get teary-eyed when she read it to me. And I said, Keisha, I was like, you're going to be the Amanda Gorman and I'm going to be the Joe Biden in this testimony, because everyone's going to remember Keisha. And of course, that's exactly what happened. 18 total speakers. At the end of it, Laura Friedman, who's an assembly member from Los Angeles, tweeted out, she said, this was the most powerful testimony I've ever heard in any committee hearing. And this was the power of the arts. And what this said to me, for the light bulb moment that I had, and I'm so grateful to Keisha for this, is that we've been doing it all wrong. We've been asking artists to sound like lobbyists and to come in and act like what I do as a professional advocate. And instead, it should be through your practice, through your words, through your movements, or whatever it is, your practices in the arts. And that's part of what we were doing here today. So anyway, she blew everyone's mind. Right, Keisha? You've got like a whole
Thank you.
now.
Thank you so much for that, Julie. So there was quite a story along with that, as Julie shared some of. And again, I'm with the Museum of African American Art. We're a small nonprofit art museum in Los Angeles, and I was, of course, honored to be invited to participate in what was, in I think February 2nd, the State Assembly Committee's hearing on restarting the arts. At that time, all indoor museums were still required to be closed because of what was happening with COVID-19. But my folks have asked since then sort of what inspired me to present my testimony in the form of a poem. And that's something that I had not done before, even though I had participated previously in legislative meetings and in advocacy through CFTA and also through CAM, the California Association of Museums. So my testimony poem at the hearing on restarting the arts just really came from my desire to tell the truth about our experiences at the Museum of African American Art. And the poem was just the form that honesty took at that time. And that's actually what we do across the arts. We take the risk of communicating in ways that have the potential to inspire. And so being invited to participate in that hearing gave our museum, our small nonprofit museum, an opportunity to say, this is our experience, this is our impact, these are our challenges, and we're not alone. And we're joining with other arts organizations statewide to ask our legislators to support the arts. So it's not my museum's voice alone that's powerful, it's all of our voices together in concert with the entire creative sector throughout the state. And so things have changed. I should say things have changed since my testimony in February. The museum has not yet reopened, although we're moving in the right direction. We have not yet brought our staff back, which we want to do. So these issues around arts workers and the creative workforce are central for us right now. And another thing that has changed is that in February, I ended my testimony poem by saying, the arts are feeding your constituents. And if I were testifying before the legislature today, I would have to add that the arts are also housing their constituents. The Museum of African American Art was recently contacted by the very dedicated friends of a homeless artist named Leon Washington, who lives in the Lomita area. And Mr. Washington is 71 years old. He began painting decades ago as a form of therapy to help him deal with a mental health condition. And we know that the topic of the arts and mental health is something that was discussed at other sessions today. And Mr. Washington has an amazing talent, and now his friends in Lomita are trying to help him sell some of his beautiful artwork so that he can move into permanent housing and improve his circumstances. So I am going to let Mr. Washington know that I shared his story with the creative community today, and maybe that will give Mr. Washington more than hope. Maybe that will give him a way out, a way back through his own artwork. And maybe word will travel and lead to a better life for homeless artist Leon Washington. And you can go to artbyleon.com to learn about Leon Washington, his life, his current circumstances, being unsheltered, his artwork, and you can also access his GoFundMe page from there. And so these are the people who reach out to museums and art centers, people like Mr. Leon Washington, because we are trusted resources within our communities. And this is the kind of work and the kind of impact that arts organizations may not always share with our legislators. So that's why we have to keep speaking out creatively and keep telling our stories in ways that inspire by bringing art directly into our advocacy efforts. So I look forward to the workshop today.
Great, thank you so much, Keisha, and for all that you do, not just as a CFTA board member, but what you do in the community. And again, what you provided in that testimony, and that's why it went viral, was something that spoke really when the speaker was talking to the heart of people. Because when you look at the arts, it touches us here, and that's why we are the responders that we are. So thank you so much. So we're going to move on, and what we're going to do is we're just going to provide, and this may be some a refresher for many people in terms of what advocacy entails, and the differences, again, between advocacy and lobbying, and what are some of the effective things that you need to know as arts advocates going forward. So in terms of advocacy versus lobbying, what's the difference? There's a blank slide here. Can everybody see that? There you go. So advocacy is the active support of an idea or cause. So basically, when you are advocating, you are educating and creating awareness with the target audience that you are focused on. And you are not endorsing or opposing a specific piece of legislation, but informing the community or the target audience about the issue or cause that you are advocating for. Now, with regards to lobbying, what lobbying is, it's where you attempt to influence a decision-making body or legislators, school board about legislation on a specific issue or cause, and you endorse or oppose that specific piece of legislation. So that is basically the two different things when we talk about advocacy versus lobbying. Advocacy is about education and creating awareness, communicating that to your target audience, whereas lobbying is where you are being an influential cog with legislators and decision makers with regards to opposing or endorsing a piece of legislation that is impactful or affecting your community. So with regards to continuing on with advocacy and lobbying, most nonprofits aren't aware that they can lobby to an extent. And so there are two areas actually which most folks will utilize, and that's either the substantial test of lobbying or the financial test in terms of financial expenditures. I show here a chart that demonstrates that when you are a nonprofit, there is a certain ceiling that you can, that you have to hit if you are going to be using your organization's budget related to lobbying activities. And the best practice is that substantial lobbying is anything spent by a nonprofit 20% over your organization's budget. So most nonprofit organizations will dedicate anywhere between 5 to under 20% to lobbying activities, while not putting them in a position that would jeopardize their 501c3. So that's what this matrix demonstrates, that if your total annual exempt purpose expenditures, as an example, is 500,000 or less, you know, the percentage that you can spend on lobbying is 20% or less, 20 being the top. And then, you know, so on as the annual exempt purpose expenditures increase. And the IRS has no hard or fast, you know, really regs regarding this, but the rule of thumb for most nonprofit organizations is that they usually will, if you're a small nonprofit, expend, you know, 5% or less on lobbying activities, and the larger organizations below 20% when it comes to being involved in opposing or endorsing legislative issues. So the next slide we'll talk about is some effective steps in terms of advocacy. And these are some habits that will influence change that we all embrace in terms of being arts advocates. Is know your beliefs, okay? Know what you believe in as it relates to your arts and cultural practice, as it relates to an arts cultural organization that you're involved in, and plan your campaign. Make advocacy a daily priority. A lot of us include advocacy as part of our daily activities. As a professional consultant, as well as someone who's involved in arts advocacy, as well as social justice advocacy, I try to make it a daily item when I think about, okay, what are some things that I should be focused on and advocating? Even in your personal lives, I have children. I advocate for their education on a daily basis. Gather, verify, and share information. There are so many fonts of information out there that it's important to ensure that you are getting your information from reputable organizations. Californians for the Arts, as an example, does a really good job of amassing resources, reports, studies that can help inform your advocacy across so many different levels. I believe California Association of Museums also does the same thing. All our different sectors are specific when we collect information and very important data that'll help drive our stories when we advocate. It's always, number 4 is be organized and responsive to all communications. A lot of times, which goes on to one of the other things, advocacy is on a time frame kind of, you know, we are run by the calendar. There are going to be deadlines that we need to respond to. So it's important that when we get communication, that we respond to those communications right away, whether it's writing a letter to an elected official or calling or signing on as an organization to support a piece of legislation. It's important to create and use a working calendar. There are always rules, whether it's a city council, a county board of supervisors, or our legislators in California, they all have legislative calendars. So it's important for us to be aware of when issues hit that impact arts and culture. And that's why the calendar will always be what drives our advocacy efforts, and important for us to be flexible. Take advantage of opportunities that are offered by candidates who are seeking a public office. A lot of times it's important to find out what their position is, what their platform is as it relates to arts and culture. And that's why your organization can advocate and possibly hold a public forum. And you have to invite, of course, all the candidates and have them talk about some of the priorities they have for arts and culture. It's important to build long-term relationships with your legislative representatives, as well as other decision makers, school board members, arts commissioners, anyone who you feel will be an asset and an ally in your advocacy work. It's always important to choose advocacy roles that are consistent with your knowledge, skills, and commitment. Not all of us can go up there and rally in Sacramento. Some of us are a little more low-keyed and we'd like to, still be involved, but we don't see ourselves going out there and grabbing the mic and just, getting everybody all inspired like Keisha does. So it's important to realize, okay, what are the skill sets that I have? What's the knowledge that I can bring to my arts advocacy? So those are some habits to just think about as we go through being advocates and being effective advocates. With regards to planning your campaign, it's important to state your goals. Okay, where is it that you want to make the change? What are you going to do in terms of making change? Identifying your target constituents. A lot of times, most of our organizations will just do a blanket kind of informing our audience about a key arts and cultural issue. But it's important if you find a segment of your audience, as an example, arts education, that you can identify to help with your advocacy efforts. Train to be a cadre of advocates on your behalf. Identify resources. What are some key things that you need to make your advocacy efforts effective? Identify partners and opponents. It's good to know who are going to be your co-conspirators, your allies, as well as those who you feel may be a challenge or a barrier to the work that you're doing with regards to advocacy. And then, of course, know the process and be informed. Whether it's at the state level, regional, or local level, there'll always be a process in terms of how you can voice your issues and concerns as arts advocates, as cultural advocates. So here's an example from Californians for the Arts. CFTA, CAA, California Arts Advocates, our sister organization, which is a 501c4, collaborated with the National Independent Venues Association of California and the California Association of Museums to advocate for a significant investment in arts and culture during Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month. And you can find more information about that on our website. And what that collaboration is to have the one-time federal stimulus dollars that are coming from the federal government to the state, and for California, invest $1 billion across 4 years in the ecosystem for arts and culture in California that will help stimulate and get us moving with regards to the impact that many of us have felt due to the pandemic. So there's an example right there in terms of a collaborative effort. With regards to creating awareness, it's important to design your key message. What is it that you want to get out there in terms of your advocacy? Build your case with data and storytelling. The assembly member was right on when he said that storytelling is going to be the cornerstone of any advocacy effort, but there are some legislators who will be more drawn to data. So it's great to have a balance between the data, the evidence that you can get from studies and reports that are reputable, and tell that personalized story from a constituent in that assembly member or state senator's district or city council member or county supervisor's district. And determine communication strategy. How are you going to get that out there? Social media, e-blasts, phone calls, action calls. So here's an example again from CFTA doing a partnership with NEVA and CAM. So as you can see there, part of getting the message there is stating that for every $1 spent on tickets or admissions to the arts, $12 in total economic impact is generated back to the local economy. Okay, so that is key in terms of the message that you want to bring to the decision makers as well as the larger population with regards to your advocacy. With regards to the next slide, when we talk about continuing steps to effective advocacy, we're talking strategies for engagement. An example from Californians for the Arts, as you can see, is our Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month. We are in now, I believe, our third, fourth year of ACCM. And one of the things that we're utilizing as one of our key programs activities is a letter writing campaign, as I had shared, on the $1 billion in stimulus dollars to be allocated to the arts and cultural industry in California. So there's another way, another strategy to generate engagement. And again, you can go and visit the California for the Arts website and find out more details with regards to this specific generation of engagement through a call to action. With regards to another step to effective advocacy, one of the things that we want to do is we want to encourage action on the part of those advocates that we are looking to engage. So how do we do that? Well, you have to determine, is it strategic to be aggressive right now or to build consensus? Answer the 5 W's for your audience. Why do I need to act? Where can I take this action? What do I need to do the action? And when do I need to do the action? And how do I do the action? So you have to determine your effective tactics based on the audience that you're working with. Will we hope after the pandemic starts to ease up, to get together for a huge rally on the steps of Sacramento at the Capitol, perhaps meetings with key decision makers, which we have been doing this past week during Arts Advocacy Week. We've been having virtual meetings with our legislators, representatives, and or their staff, as well as key decision makers. E-blasts are important. Whether you're an organization or an individual creative and artist, I've seen many of my colleagues or individual artists who have their own website and actually put out e-blasts, letting folks know when their artwork is going to be on an exhibit. One thing you as an individual artist or creative can also add on there is how to advocate and work with other individual artists and creatives. Keisha, I'm sure that, I see you nodding your head. Is that something that individual artists and creatives could also strengthen with regards to advocacy?
Absolutely. There are always going to be opportunities. Anytime you're talking about communicating and how to communicate, you're potentially talking about how to do that creatively. So that's where your art, your practice, your art form can come in very, very strongly and can be very much an inspiration to those who are on the receiving end of the call to action that you're communicating. To have that image from your organization's work or from your own practice, to have that video, in my case, to have those words or that poetry, something to really stick in the minds of the recipients who you're asking to take action, or to stick in the minds of the legislators who you may be talking to or presenting to. Absolutely.
Great, thank you, Keisha. Additional steps to effective advocacy is, in order to sustain the momentum, it's so important that you organize, and that's not just individually, but also across different coalitions. Show up and be consistent. It's important to consistently get that message out, but also to be consistent in terms of the work that you do with regards to your advocacy. Be flexible. As I had mentioned earlier, a lot of times we're run by the calendar. And so our calendar may not be aligned with the legislators' calendar or any of the decision makers' calendar. So it's very important for us as arts advocates to be flexible and finally to be hopeful. I think one of the key things in our sector, in our industry, is that we are very hopeful. And the reason why so many are turning to us during this time, the pandemic, as well as just so much in terms of unrest. Artists are the ones who bring solace and calm and centering for many in our community. So it's important that you remember these in terms of sustaining the momentum. As an example, again, from Californians for the Arts, CFTA has been responsive to the needs of the field during this global financial, mental, and public health crisis. So we were actually one of the first organizations to pivot our place-based conferences because it happened in 2020. So we had to quickly transition from an in-person convening to a virtual convening. Again, thus showing the flexibility, but also the hopefulness of ensuring that those who supported arts and culture and the advocates involved would follow us. And indeed they did. I believe, and Julie had reported out during that year that we had a very, very huge turnout for that virtual convening. I like to think it's because of the fact that many who can't make it to Sacramento can easily go online and this is during 2020, and participate in our virtual advocacy convening. So I think it's really beneficial during that time that we did pivot and be very flexible in our advocacy work and engaging the entire state of California. One of the key things that the speaker brought up was the importance of relationships, and that's important because you need to develop relationships on all levels of government, whether they be local, state, or federal. And then a reminder is that federal legislation does affect state and local government, but no level of government is more important than the other. They all work in unison with each other. So it's important, as he had said, to make that impact at the local level, but just as important to make it at the regional and the federal level. When we talk about the type of positions at the local level, we're talking about your mayor, your council members, your county supervisors, your school board members, essential in arts education advocacy, arts commissioners. Get your arts and cultural commissioners on board with you because many of them are also arts advocates. And remember that communication is essential when you are making your advocacy work. You know, I have a list here of all the local, state, and federal level folks, but most importantly, it's important to communicate to your audience because those are your potential advocates who will join in and work with you in spreading the message and the issue of arts and cultural as a valuable and essential part of our state. So with regards to that, we're gonna now move on to a brainstorming activity. But before then, I see we had advocacy resources. Just want to remind you that Californians for the Arts, we stay and maintain a active and up-to-date database of advocacy resources to help you to become an effective and informed arts advocate. That's as individuals, but that's also as arts and cultural organizations. So please make sure that you visit Californians for the Arts website and the pull-down menu and look at the different types of resources that, as well as, you know, we have many of our past events that were recorded available for viewing at our advocacy resources webpage. So with that, moving on to what I had shared earlier, before advocacy resources was a brainstorming activity. And what we'd like to do is we're going to have you break out in rooms we've assigned, and we've got about close to 59 participants. We're gonna assign you to a breakout room with 3 to 4 other folks for a 5-minute brainstorm. And what we ask you to do is, because we've got so many, there'll be people from different arts, cultural disciplines in this workshop, we want you to choose an artistic discipline from amongst the people in your group. Then we want you to choose an area to focus your advocacy efforts. As an example, arts education, racial equity. You can even reflect on some of the sessions that you attended today in terms of your focus for your advocacy, and then discuss how would you use the identified artistic discipline or disciplines, because this is an important, I think, opportunity to collaborate with different disciplines in your advocacy campaign. So with that, let's move people to the breakout rooms. You'll have 5 minutes and we'll bring you back. Okay, and we're back. I know that probably folks in my group were going like, this is not enough time. And that's what we wanted to have, is just to begin that conversation, to inspire people in terms of how they can use their artistic discipline, their craft, to focus on an advocacy effort, and how do you use that craft or discipline in developing the advocacy effort, advocacy campaign. So as we come back, I was going to ask folks to share back some of the ideas that happened in the breakout rooms. Is there anyone who would like to share some of the ideas that happened in 5 minutes in their breakout room?
This is David Quinley from Elkhurst. I think we were mostly just lost. We mostly sat there for a couple of minutes pretty silent because we didn't know what to do. We got a message saying the thing would start in a few minutes. So I was waiting for it to start. I assumed there was going to be like a moderator or something. And there wasn't. So I just started talking.
Okay, good. I'm glad, David, because a lot of times folks.
There was only 3 of us.
Yeah.
There's a few people that have their hands up.
Okay, go ahead. I can't see that raising hands, but.
Josiah, why don't you go ahead and share?
Yeah.
Thank you. So our group, it was 3 of us, and we talked about, one had dance, and then another's, or 2 of us were in music. One's in the LA Philharmonic. And then we started talking about how in the pandemic, we're trying to do like urban gardening with outdoor music and
Nice.
outdoor stadiums. And she gave me the concept of going to the Getty Museum and talking to them, as that's right up their alley. And that was kind of great because I had never thought about something like that. I thought always of the Getty as just a museum and not an educator or education programming platform as well. So that's kind of where we left off on our conversation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Josiah. How about Rosanna? Rosanna,
yeah, we had a small group of 3, and we try to stay on task, and it definitely didn't feel like enough time. But what I will say that emerged from that conversation is how we're each from different regions. So you had someone from Ukiah, someone from Oakland, then you have me, who's a hybrid between San Jose and Gilroy, and talking about some of the struggles of access in artist work. And by advocacy, someone gave the example of a poster campaign that they're working on. And it got me thinking about, that storytelling piece in general. And then what naturally, organically emerged, kind of off topic, but on topic, was this idea that, across regions, artists are so multifaceted. And because of the landscape of the gig economy, oftentimes we're working in different fields. And so that advocacy, and even when we request funding, needs to look a little bit more of what's been reinforced throughout the day's pláticas here, which is it's not the arts or, it's the arts and how we move that advocacy from mental health, from education, from urban planning, and it's not in competition, it's a part of those conversations.
Great, thank you, Rosanna. Yeah, I think that's what the intent is for this. Let me turn it over to Angelica Orozco. Angelica, you have your hand up. Share back with us.
I also see Constance's
okay
up as well.
Let's go, Constance. Can you share with us what your group had talked about with regards to the brainstorm?
Yes, hi, Teresa and I spoke about, she's in Alameda County, and just how necessary it is for us to be truly connected, like the New England Arts Foundation, right? That we all are really aware of each other's talents and what we're doing, so that we can build each other up no matter what the work is, so that we don't always have to rely on outside talent from other states, that we can lift each other's talent up, and that those shows can go on to then have their own life in other cities. So we're not just always uplifting other cities' shows, but that LA has California has a wide range of talent from all around these different counties and spaces, and people are trying to survive. But there's not enough space. There's not enough state-supported space. And if there is space, even BIPOC spaces are very expensive to rent. So what do we do about making it accessible? And how do we like just connect all of our stories and all of our work? How do we create a really aggressive coalition?
Great, thank you so much for sharing that, Constance. I think one of the things, again, that we're trying to emphasize is for us to bust out of our individual silos and to be cross-collaborative across our arts and cultural disciplines. And that's one thing that sometimes artists and creatives have a tendency to do. You just want to stay with your specific discipline or craft and not look over and have dancers working with multimedia artists, working with theater, you know, and it's important that we begin these conversations. And that's why this brainstorm was intentionally short, to see where we could go with that. Because, you know, for many of us, we have continued to do collaborative efforts. Some, this is a first time effort. So thank you so much, Constance, for sharing that. Amy, share with us what your group did.
Yeah, we already get a chance to kind of introduce ourselves and see what we do. We didn't get a chance to brainstorming, but I answered several questions my group asking me about, you know, they like the little people was dancing up there, those a grandpa that could have access to dance with the kids and grandkids. My advocacy comes from my own recovery journey from cancer and how creative arts really make a difference. And I wanted to make that accessible to all patients and elders who are stuck at home, especially during this pandemic. And I was sharing with them that I'm from tech industry. I know nothing about politics, you know, policymakers, and I'm very passionate to bridge creative arts and healthcare. And I was sharing in the chats, like, we got about 80 research papers, you know, like in addition to helping cancer patients, this is a data for, you know, helping reduce risk of dementia. And that eventually going to cost half our Medicare money. There's also a UK study of 48,000 patients indicating dancing actually reduced cardiovascular death by 46%. So in Europe, UK government is pushing doctor to prescribe art. And in the US, we just think like art and health is kind of like two separate things, right? And so I really see that it's a great way to bring sustainability for both communities. So artists gets paid, a patient get benefit, and you know, healthcare costs is reduced, government economic costs is reduced. And I am need help and scratching my head here, trying to like innovate in healthcare. And like also realize like really half the job is really public education, like raise awareness of these kind of data, but also like how do we work with government and advocates, like really kind of, you know, having some fundamental mind shifting, you know, how art is beyond just, you know, making people happy, it actually heals people. Yeah, so that's why I'm here. And, you know, anybody is interested in this topic, please connect with me.
Thank you so much, Amy. And again, you know, this speaks, you know, as one of the sessions about going across different sectors, how arts and culture is actually interwoven in so many different things in our lives. So thank you so much, Amy, for doing that. And as a dancer, I know, you know, does heal for me. It makes me feel better. I'm a trained Afro-Haitian and Cuban dancer. So thank you so much for everyone joining. We want to just show some examples of how art is a political tool for advocacy and social justice. And Shirian Damra, as an example, I'm using here as a designer illustrator from Chicago and has her roots in Palestine, but you can follow her on Instagram. She came up with these beautiful, you know, cube artistic illustrations that demonstrate her work and support in terms of everything from the Black Lives Movement to, and the next one will show that she goes across so many different social justice spectrums in terms of stop Asian hate, support Indigenous struggle, as well as helping get the vote out. So I use this as an example because many artists and creatives can utilize their discipline and craft to help educate on that part of advocacy and issues and causes. And so it's important whether you're a visual artist, a dancer, a musician, to utilize your craft in helping raise many of us across all different sectors, whether it is health, whether it's transportation, it's housing, and how can you use your craft to be able to bring the message forward to decision makers and policymakers, as Keisha did when she did her testimonial poem over at the State Assembly. So it's important to see what is it that I can bring as an artist, as a creative, as a cultural bearer, maker, to advocacy in whatever area that it is that you're seeking to identify, whether it's racial justice, arts education, affordable housing, etc. So again, as the speaker had said, art is politics. And so it's important to use then art as a political tool when we work in our advocacy and social justice spaces. So as we come towards the end, and thank you so much for those folks. I know that it's hard to brainstorm in 5 minutes, but that was the intent, is to get folks thinking how you can in 5 minutes put together and utilize each other's discipline and craft. So here are some advocacy organizations nationwide who are doing some amazing work with regards to making sure that arts and culture are maintained on the radar screen of many of our elected officials and decision makers. NASA, which is the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, you see NEVA there, Americans for the Arts Action Fund, which is their 501c4, and the Performing Arts Alliance, which is a coalition of performing arts advocates nationwide. So those are just a snippet of some of our national partners working in the realm of advocacy. And then when you look at in terms of the next regional partners, we've got the Western States Arts Federation. You got Arts for a Better Bay Area based in San Francisco, San Jose Arts Advocates, of which I'm a co-founder of, the Sacramento Alliance for Regional Arts, and of course, Arts for LA, that does an amazing job in the city and county of Los Angeles. So these are just some of our advocacy organization partners who are involved in that. And then we look at our state partners. Besides CFTA, you've got the California Association of Museums, California Alliance for Arts Education, Create California, which is merging, and of course, ACSO, which is the Association of California Symphony Orchestras. So you have all these organizations that you can tap into and reach out to with regards to finding more about how you can be involved in advocacy, and which we have said in the opening session, which is a movement. We don't see it as a campaign anymore. It's turning into a huge movement. So as we move on towards the end of our session, I want to share this very beautiful video that was put out by the city of Santa Monica, and it's their Arts Month 2021 proclamation. So let's take a look at it right now.
Whereas 2020 was distinctly historic, a mouthful of vocabulary, pandemic, impeachment, insurrection, and not a single word hyperbole. A bigger picture of America dreaming itself awake, a mouthful of vocabulary, accountability, atonement, reparations, and not a single word hyperbole. 8 minutes and 46 seconds in, and the revolution is televised. Whereas we huddled together, separately, witnessing a new normal, isolated inside, masked outside, afraid of each other. Who are we now? Are we now four corners, a background, a mic and camera on? Doubling up on duties, doubling down on distractions until there's nothing left to see but who we are. Who are we, Santa Monica? With an ocean at our border, there's no direction to go at land's end but inland. How do we navigate forward with the ocean at our back? And what is the language of journey, of spirit? When the tourists return, and they will, who will we be, Santa Monica? Whereas there are 90,000 of us in 5 zip codes? What if art made civil unrest? What if conflict were a dance battle of wits on the page while the crow circles, cawing commentary to the mockingbird who translates it in the air? What if art steadies the hands, bringing broth to the empty belly, and music soothes the sorrowed breast, and the sidewalks sing out covered in children's chalk. Whereas 6 feet connects us at a distance, symphony, dance, dance, dance begs the body out of isolation. A river of roses commemorates our beloved body count. On Main Street, art and commerce dine al fresco, and at the historic Belmar Park now stands a red open house in conversation with development, history, and the fire next time. Whereas another normal is unfolding, whereas art is spoken here, let it lift every voice and sing.
Very powerful resolution and creative and artistic. What did you think of that, Keisha?
Can you hear me? I was just typing my response into the chat. That was absolutely beautiful, absolutely amazing, and just a wonderful, wonderful and very current example of everything we've been talking about, you know, in this workshop today, about using art and using our voices, using language, and in that example, using multimedia, using images, using all of those different art forms to tell the story of, you know, the city of Santa Monica reemerging, you know, post COVID. Just beautifully done.
I agree.
I love the use.
Go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to say I love the use of the whereas, because all resolutions are written whereas da da da, whereas da, da, and she used that term, so it was like it fit into the concept around Arts Month, like because we all get proclamations and resolutions and all this sort of stuff, but it was such a, you know, brilliant use of the words.
Yes, exactly, Julie. And I think, you know, similar to the work that Keisha did during that Restart the Arts testimonial poem, they created this city resolution with poetry, with visual. I mean, you can see dance in there. So I think if anything, you know, this illustrates how we as artists and creatives can really actively use our craft in, you know, our advocacy efforts. And I want to hear from folks. So I know we go till 4:45, but I wanted to provide an opportunity for folks to share, especially as this is the last session before, not last session, but the workshop, you know, for the afternoon. We still have our closing, and how this has perhaps inspired you or given you ideas moving, you know, forward in your advocacy, in your city, in your region, in your county. So want to entertain some comments and feedback from those here in this session. And I can't see some hands here, so folks want to unmute.
I was just going to give a plug for the last session while we're waiting for people to join in, which starts at 5 o'clock, and it's just an hour long, but we've got Las Cafeteras, an amazing band from East Los Angeles is going to be, 3 of the members, Frenchie, Hector, and Denise, will be talking about their work primarily right now in Georgia that they're doing in terms of using their music, their videos to really engage in social justice issues and activism. And I think it really will inspire artists, particularly in those of us who work with artists, on what is the application of how we can utilize artists in their practice to actually push forward our movements and our advocacy, whatever that might be, whatever change you're trying to affect. So I hope that people will join us there. And I do see a hand up. I did the filler for you.
Rocco?
There you go. Thank you, Julie. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm wondering if anybody in this group has done any specific outreach to artists or cultural groups that have been displaced from their town or their area to try to be part of the advocacy movement, and then potentially if there are measures put into place where there is opportunity for space that is either affordable or an ownership opportunity that can be brought back into our town as opposed to just leaving and being forgotten.
Thank you, Hiroka, for that, for putting that out there. Anyone, as in your particular, cities, counties, areas, has anyone reached out to those displaced artists, creatives, and what have you been doing to find space or get them, reestablished?
Well,
go ahead.
Quinley.
Go ahead, David.
My advocacy has been mostly through Twitter and Facebook. And I also do politics, mostly through Facebook. So, I mostly just send out information and some opinions about various arts and politics. I know that I know there's a big issue in San Francisco because they have a big arts community and it's really hard to survive there as an artist. I was born there, so I sort of keep track of what's going on there. Marin County, where I used to live, it was common knowledge that there were more artists than there were collectors, and so you always had that nutrition of just being more art being produced than there were people to collect it. And Sacramento County, where I live now, I'm not as familiar with the issues. I try to keep track of it, but there just seemed to be less information as far as I've been able to keep track of. I try to, if artists reach out to me, I try to reach back to them, but there's really only so much you can do, and right. I don't spend nearly enough time on my own art. So yeah, I haven't spent a huge amount of time, outreach beyond just, looking around at various calendars of things that are going on and reaching out to those groups. Sometimes I find, I tend to think just sort of letting people know that you're interested by posting them on Facebook or Twitter, what they're doing. That's often quite a bit, it lets people know that you're interested and someone out there is interested in what they're doing, and just letting people know that you're interested in what they're doing sometimes is all you really can do, especially if you're poor like me. And
right. Okay. Well, thank you, David, for sharing this. We have a couple of hands up. I want to make sure we get people in. Angelica, go ahead. Oh, no worries. Thank you, David. Angelica.
I think one of the big issues that came up during the pandemic was the mental health awareness, and that definitely got a lot of, I guess, it got exasperated, So for me as a youth, art was a reason to survive, and it was a way for me to have control of my mental health. And I think that's something that has been lacking in the decades with the budget cuts in the school systems, children not having access to creative outlets. And I really think being able to connect mental health institutions and mental health programming to more arts and the youth, I think it'll impact. I think that's where a lot of focus needs to be.
Thank you so much, Angelica, for sharing your story with us. And I think it's important that we connect all those different sectors, mental health as well as other sectors. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Sarah, share with us, please.
Hi there. I just wanted to speak from the perspective of somebody who's working through some grassroots local arts organizations, the Truckee Arts Alliance in particular, and we help facilitate Truckee's Cultural District, which is part of the California Cultural District program. So one of the things that I've lived in this area for almost 25 years. And so kind of the function that I've ended up performing within this circle of amazing people has been primarily helping to interconnect people that are in the arts community, because I'm also a professional artist, and people that work in and around the creative community. So in answer to your question, in reaching out to people that have been displaced, because let's be honest, I live in Tahoe. So a lot of people have been displaced. And interestingly, one of the effects of the pandemic was that a lot more people were really rapidly displaced because so many people left the cities en masse and came to places like Tahoe, bought up all of the housing, and then a whole bunch of people lost their housing really rapidly. So one of the good things that we've got going on in particular in Truckee is this, this wonderful artist housing opportunity. And so I made a point of trying to reach out to the people that I knew had to move to Reno, or they moved outside of the area, and just to let them know, apply, try to come back if you want to. There are opportunities to be able to come back to the community. And so we've just tried to leverage whatever opportunities we have to disseminate information through social media, through outreach directly. That seems to be kind of my specialty, is like directly reaching out to people, text them, call them, you know, email and say, hey, this is what's happening. Check it out. Just so you know, Tahoe might not be a lost cause for you. You might be able to come back and still be creative here. So, but unfortunately, a lot of people were displaced really rapidly in the last year. And it was a very odd side effect of the pandemic, because everybody was like, oh, I don't have to live in the city anymore. I can go wherever I want and telecommute. So it's definitely made it's impacted our internet. It's impacted the community in a lot of ways, but including displacing a lot of people.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that perspective.
But then it's also,
yeah.
One other little aspect of that is that it's actually brought in a lot of money. So it's actually supported several visual artists and other people as well. So it's an interesting kind of double-sided coin there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sarah. Let's go to Rosanna. Thank you so much. Rosanna Alvarez. Yeah. Yes, Rosanna.
Three words come to mind. It's leveraging, connecting, and then organizing, and like hitting the ground and people to people organizing. And so for me, I'm a foot in both worlds, both in San Jose and in Gilroy. And I live in Gilroy, and I work. My arts-based work is based out of San Jose. And so I'm seeing the effect of both concerns and the solution side of things. And so in San Jose, it's like we have the beautiful part of being organized and having those relationships in a little bit more of a structured, supported way that includes the support of policymakers that are addressing the, you know, basic needs of our artists to enable those things. And then I see that a little bit of a different flow out in Gilroy. But those three words still apply, because part of what we're doing with the support of SB Creates out here is reaching out to homegrown artists who are fighting like heck to stay put in a place where they grew up and developed their artistry, who are oftentimes overlooked by the influx of new opportunity and funding. And so the connect, organize, and advocate really does connect to how we're reaching out to folks on the ground and doing our work of figuring out, okay, well, who are these artists? What do they need? Listening to them, and then kind of being bridge builders with the folks who have a little bit more say in funding allocation, resource allocation, mental health services that are being provided, and how can we strategically advocate for funding streams to support these artists already doing the work, on top of them having to fight to stay put in a place where we're having an influx of folks from up north. So those are the three things that come to mind, like solidly, specifically out here.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that, Rosanna.
I think our last hand up is Michaela, and then I think we'll have to wrap for the afternoon.
Yeah, great, go ahead, Michaela.
Hi, I apologize if I misunderstood the question, but we've been working with a lot of theater companies that have lost their venues and trying to collaborate between the legacy older theater companies that either own their buildings or have them very low lease, and really trying to encourage them to allow younger or emerging theater companies that either never had a space or recently lost their space to be kind of an artist in residency in those more established theater buildings. Because we've found that it's almost impossible to try and buy a theater venue right now. And we're also trying to combat the fact that it's so hard to get event permitting in Los Angeles for non-theatrical spaces. So we've been doing it on two fronts of advocating for easier permitting laws, collaborating between young theater companies and theater companies that own buildings, and then also just trying to make sure that people have access and resources to continue creating the art. And so that'll be more specific when we can reopen the theater buildings, like the physical buildings. But on the other hand, we've also been helping some of the older theater companies learn digital theater from some of the younger theater companies. So it's been kind of a back and forth of trying to help each other out. But that's kind of the holistic view of how we've tried to manage theater companies that lost their spaces.
Great, thank you so much. And I think that was also the other side of the coin. Hiroko brought up individual creators and artists, but arts and cultural organizations are also being displaced, as you had said. The small ones who no longer can afford, if they're renting space, where do they go? So thank you so much, Michaela, for bringing that up. And it looks like there's a balance between the legacy theater arts organizations and the new and emerging ones working to support each other so that they can continue to thrive. I want to turn it over, to Keisha. You want to say some final words with regard to the session? We have up here the agenda, and we're coming to the end of our great Arts, Culture, Creativity Month convening.
No, I just appreciate everyone's ideas and participation in this workshop, and just the thinking about arts and how we use that to advocate, and the discussion just here in the last few minutes about the issues that we're seeing, regionally, small towns being impacted by, the movement from larger cities, spaces. These are all things that we will be, and in some places already are, advocating around. So definitely keep those wheels turning, keep those ideas going, keep those conversations happening and those collaborations happening, because I feel confident, because we are creative and because we are in that sector, feel confident and hopeful that we can find solutions to those issues, even with all of the strangeness of the current circumstances. So thanks again to everyone.
Right, and I echo your sentiments. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us for this session. And then also, bringing up Matt Carney of our California for the Arts Programs Manager put the link. Please sign the letter. We're talking about displacement of artists, creatives, and arts and cultural organizations. What $1 billion that we're proposing from the federal stimulus to the states, then putting in plans and strategies for our artists and creatives. So thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you at the closing performance of Las Cafeteras from Los Angeles. And remember, you are all art. So become an arts advocate, join Californians for the Arts, and check out our resources on the website. Thank you all.
Thanks everyone.